So a couple weeks ago, I made a video talking about my struggles with bike burnout. Well, I decided to see if I could work my way out of it by riding 1,000 feet every day for 30 days. I decided to treat bike burnout as a symptom of falling out of the habit of bicycling. I'd recently read the book Tiny Habits, and it really inspired me to look at bicycling as a habit and seeing whether or not I could reinstill that habit. The three big takeaways I learned from this book that I applied in my 30 days of climbing were: one, in order to start a habit, you definitely want to start small. Granted, I know 1,000 feet a day is definitely a lot bigger than a really small step, but hey, I just thought I'd make a fun YouTube video. The idea of taking a small step rather than committing to a huge goal is that if the step is small enough, it flies under the radar of all the alarm bells in our brain. You set too big of a goal, your brain freaks out and you experience paralysis. But if you can set a smallish, achievable goal, then you're more likely to do the task and form that habit. The second big takeaway is this idea of motivation versus, let's say, ease of use. If you're trying to form a habit where you have low motivation, you want to make it as simple as possible to do. So for example, to make it easier for myself to want to ride every day, I set up all my bike clothes the night before and had the bike that I was going to ride the next day already with tools and everything. I know it sounds so simple, but there are often times where I'm pretty disorganized and it takes me half an hour to find my helmet, my nutrition for the day. And by the time I get everything prepared, I'm 45 minutes in and I've lost a lot of motivation to go ride the bike. The third big takeaway is this idea of what prompts a habit. You could either write a note or an alarm on your phone, but in the book he argues the best prompt is another habit. So what that looked like for me was, the ritual or the habit of putting on bike clothes, getting the bike ready, and then pushing it out the door, which was then a cue to at least go down the block, see how I felt, and from there that would trigger the habit of riding up 1,000 feet. So how did it all turn out? Have I rekindled my passion for cycling? Was it fun? Well, it's complicated, but you know what's not complicated is the sponsor for the video today, the Independence Hotel located in Independence, Oregon in the Willamette Valley. The Independence Hotel is a brand spanking new hotel that is super bike friendly. They have a brand new fleet of rental bikes as well as a bike workstation. Each room has its own place to put a bike, which is just bonkers. They've also worked closely with the chamber to form Bike Indy, Oregon. This is a link to the best of the best rides in Independence, Oregon. So you've got some short road rides, some longish road rides, some mixed terrain grab rides to choose from, and you can make a whole weekend out of your stay at the Independence Hotel. So if you live in the Pacific Northwest and are looking for an awesome gravel getaway, definitely check out the Independence Hotel in Independence, Oregon. All the pertinent links below, and if you're a Patreon supporter, you get 10% off your night's stay. I know one of the first big questions you guys are going to have is why 1,000 feet a day? For me, I'm pretty time crunched, so I figured I wanted to do a ride where I would exert a lot of effort and hopefully have the biggest gains from that short interval. We live in Missoula. Everything is at least 1,000-foot climb here. It's pretty easy to find 1,000 feet, and I can usually do that ride within like an hour or hour and a half. Perfect length to fit in a daily schedule. My primary motivation was to get back into the habit of cycling every day, but also to get a jump start on fitness for the summer riding season. And I know for a lot of you, 1,000 feet doesn't sound very impressive, but it's not supposed to be like an Everesting challenge every single day. It's supposed to be something small and accomplishable so I can gain this momentum in riding a bike again. I recorded all my rides on Ride with GPS, which is one of our favorite platforms. I could put notes about how I felt at the end of each day. And I began this personal challenge on April 26th, ended it on May 29th for a total of about 34 days. And I'll get into why I extended it over 3 days a little bit later in the video. During this month of riding, I rode different bikes on different climbs. I did repeat sections with the same bike, but my end goal wasn't to necessarily track performance gains, it was to build the habit. So there isn't a true apples to apples comparison of metrics during the month. So how'd it go? Well, as you would expect, the first couple days of the first week went awesome. The whole thing was novel, I was highly motivated, and I maintained my longest streak of the month in this period. So I rode 10 consecutive days, and each day I rode at least 1,000 feet. Typically more around 12 to 1,500, but this by far was my longest streak, as you would expect, because I was really motivated. At the end of the 10th day, I was feeling a lot of fatigue. 1,000 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're coming off of not riding all winter, then the fatigue slowly adds up. I kind of liken it to that weird torture where, they give you 2 apples and you have to hold them apart at arm's length. For the first half hour, no big deal, but after 2 or 3 hours, even a small weight can feel like a ton. And that's what I was experiencing on the bike. My quads were sore, my calves were sore. I was just out of practice of riding every day, or riding that much every day. So that was the first 2 weeks. On the 3rd week, I had another 5 consecutive days of riding at least 1,000 feet, but then I hit another wall and had to take another break. I really tried to listen to my body when it was tired and telling me not to ride, because I didn't want to overtrain or overstress myself and just end up hating bicycling all over again. In the 4th week, I had another stretch of 4 days, and then it rained and it rained and it rained for 3 days. And this is why I extended my 30 days to a couple more days so I can account for those rainy, wet days. Again, this was about forming the habit, trying to frame bicycling in a positive way, not turning it into some weird forced march. So I gave myself some grace and skipped those 3 days. As weather permitted, I snuck in another ride and then more rain. By the end of it, I was feeling pretty frustrated because I wanted to ride, but the weather was just not cooperating, and I felt like this whole month of riding and video was getting torpedoed. So like I said, I tacked on more days so I could get a little bit more climbing in, give myself some grace, and complete this challenge strong. So what did I learn after this 34 days of attempting to climb 1,000 feet? The first big lesson is that I found micro goals fairly effective for me. So if the day's goal was to ride 1,000 feet, I would set other smaller goals of 1, putting the clothes on, getting the bike ready, going out the door, and pedaling out the block. And ultimately that would cascade into the ride and completing the tasks for the day. Another thing I learned is that doing something every single day isn't necessarily healthy, both from a physiological perspective, but also a mental one. I found that I was experiencing a fair amount of fatigue, and it was just harder and harder the more consecutive days I rode. Even when we were training for Dirty Kansas, we built in specific rest days and weren't riding every single day. So by no means take this as a training program, but rest days are good. They're just as important as training days, if that's what you want to call what I just did. Mentally, it was also tough because after about the 2nd week, it started to feel like work again. It started to feel like drudgery. And I started to think of all the opportunity costs, all the things I was giving up by doing this one thing. It's spring here in Montana, some of the best fishing, and I was giving up time and energy from another thing I truly love to do this thing, which I also love most of the time. And so that kind of tension and tug of war really kind of weighed heavy on my mind later on in the month. On the flip side of that, I did find that I successfully created the habit for wanting to bike every single day. On those days when it rained, I was really craving to go outside and do something physically active. That tells me at least that a part of me had developed that habit of wanting to ride every day. So I'll get to the final numbers in a little bit, but first, was it successful? Was I successful? Did it get me out of bike burnout? Has it rekindled the spark, the passion I have for bicycling? This is a little bit more complicated. I do find that I'm enjoying riding more now because I am in better shape to do it. It's not quite the same roaring passion that I've had in the past, but it's better than a couple months ago. Let's just put it that way. One thing it did make me do in all those hours of riding was kind of reevaluate why I like to ride bikes in the first place. For me, it boils down to this. I like biking for a purpose. So that means either commuting or going to an interesting destination or to ride with friends. But riding for riding's sake, for just pure fitness's sake, kind of boring. Might be taboo to say that, but kind of boring. It also made me realize how much I don't like riding solo. Up until this year, every time I've gone out with a ride, it's usually been with Laura or with a friend, and that helps pass the time away. You can have conversation, and that's when I enjoy cycling the most. But doing it by yourself just to tick off some boxes, to fill up some numbers on a spreadsheet, not the kind of cycling I like doing. So what are the final numbers? In that 34-day span of time, I rode 25 days of those 34 days. The total mileage was 292 miles, and the total elevation gain for that period was 30,200 feet of climbing. So can you reason your way out of bike burnout if you frame it as a habit? For me, running this self-experiment, I think the answer is an equivocal maybe. I've been able to successfully develop that craving to ride every day. Is it as burning a passion as it was, in the early days when I got into bikes? Definitely not, but still, it's a start. It's a much better place than where I was, 2 or 3 months ago. I'm actually looking forward to riding more for fun this summer. And speaking of fun, don't forget to check out the sponsor of this video, the Independence Hotel in Independence, Oregon, where you don't have to ride 1,000 feet a day. Heck, you can ride whatever you want, road or gravel, drink some wine, all that good stuff. If you guys have any questions, leave those in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to support it, definitely check out the links to the Independence Hotel, stop by the gift shop, join us on Patreon, and as always, keep the supple side down.